I'm the Executive Director and General Counsel at the International Intellectual Property Institute. This may be a little dark, I hope you guys can see. We are based in Washington, D.C. Now, we're a small, nonprofit, both international development organization and think tank. And our mission, I guess our raison d'etre, is to work with countries to help them use more effectively intellectual property rights for their own economic growth and development. These two handsome gentlemen, Mr. Bruce Lehman and Jorge Amigo, are the chairman and vice chairman of my institute. Mr. Lehman was the head of the United States Patent and Trademark Office for close to 6 years under President Clinton in the 90s. And Mr. Amigo was the founder and head of the Mexican Industrial Property Institute. He ran that for 17 years. He's actually one of the longest lived heads of an intellectual property office in the world. So I bring their wisdom, their wealth of experience to you today because, as you may kind of perceive, a lot of people think the global intellectual property system is asymmetrical, that only a small handful of countries produce most of the intellectual property rights in the world, whether we talk about copyright, particularly patents. But of course, as we know, that's not the case, right? You have a tremendous amount of creativity and innovation here in Lebanon, and that's our focus here today. I'm going to talk very briefly about copyright. What is copyright? Well, it covers a work of authorship fixed in a tangible medium. Now, this is kind of an interesting concept. Something that can be protected by copyright is, the instant you write something down on a piece of paper, if you write a sentence, if you write a poem, if you write a letter, it is immediately protected by copyright. That is a work of authorship. It is creative. You are acting creatively, and it's fixed in a tangible medium, right? So it actually has to be on a piece of paper or recorded. I'll talk about the example of choreography and dance in a minute. So when we talk about copyright, which is an exclusive right to be able to say what to do with the copying or the transfer or the distribution of your creation. As Richard talked about, and I'll give you a little more overview here. We talk about the copyright industries in Lebanon. What does that mean? Well, we have to get a little more specific. So there's something called the core copyright industries. As you can see, the categories press and literature, music and theater, video, software. But it's also interesting because not only do we look at, when we think about the creative industries, we don't just look at the core, but we also look at the other business that's generated around these industries. So we look at interdependent industries. So facilitating the use or production of creative products. So one example here is, video cameras. Digital cameras, right? They allow for you to create something. We talk about partial. This is a little more interesting. So we have some architects, I believe, in the audience. So copyright, of course, is important. So architecture firms could be considered a partial copyright industry because of the reliance on schematics and drawings, which are protected by copyright. Finally, we have non-dedicated support industries. This is also kind of interesting. If you think about internet service providers, if you guys use, say I use iTunes to download music, for instance, my internet service provider could actually be considered a non-dedicated support industry because they facilitate that transaction. So again, let's look at the numbers. This is copyright, believe it or not, this is an important industry here in Lebanon. As Richard said, and I alluded to earlier, we're talking about over $1 billion in GDP. And this accounts for about 50,000 jobs. So you know, this is not insignificant, and Lebanon is, in terms of other countries, is actually quite good. Of course, we have the problem of infringement. I was just talking to one of the gentlemen from a newspaper, and he was saying, well, you know, we have a problem with people copying material. Like, if you're a journalist, you know, you don't want people misappropriating your work. I mean, you make a living on these creations, this work. So, as you can imagine, we still have a problem. There's software piracy, 72%, motion picture piracy at 80%, and then recording and music at 70%. These numbers are a little old, but they don't necessarily have updated figures. Talking about the Berne Convention, this is intellectual property rights. There's no such thing as an international copyright. It depends on the national laws. One of the first things you learn in law school is that there's no such thing as international law. There's no such thing as international copyright law. So the example I gave earlier, if you start to write a letter, you have protection. You do have a copyright in that. And the reason you do is because other countries are a party to the Berne Convention, most likely, or you have bilateral treaties between you know, the United States and Lebanon or other countries. So at the end of the day, you are going to be protected, most likely in other countries. There's also a concept of moral rights, which is interesting. We don't really have this in the United States. You do have them here in Lebanon, moral rights. This is the right to paternity, which is really the right to attribution, meaning if I have a painting, I always have the right to have my name be recognized as the creator of that painting. Nobody can take that away from me. And then additionally, you have the right of integrity, which means you have your painting, you have the right to determine the fate of that painting, right? So somebody, if you sell it and then 50 years down the road, somebody can't deface it because you have the right to control what it looks like. This is also really important. Now, Lebanon is not yet a member of the World Trade Organization. Member states of the World Trade Organization are bound by something called Trade-Related Aspects on Intellectual Property Rights. This is one of my favorite acronyms, TRIPS. It's easy. TRIPS means that there are certain minimum protections that a country needs to have or enact, certain minimum laws and requirements in order to be a party to the WTO. So I think Richard mentioned this earlier. There are certain standards that everybody has to meet. Now, of course, you may have the laws on the books, but they may not be enforced. This is a common problem in many countries, and I know it's a problem here in Lebanon too. But TRIPS is very important in terms of intellectual property rights protection around the world. Okay, so as I start to close here, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work that IIPI has done in other parts of the world. And this is about protecting and promoting creativity, innovation in other parts of the world. So we did a series of workshops in Mexico City, in Lima, Peru, and in Cambodia. We had over 400 people attend these workshops. The goal here was to help them get a better feel, a better understanding for intellectual property rights and how they can be used to protect and promote their cultural products. We were working with primarily indigenous peoples here. And as you can imagine, they have a problem. Let me give you an example. You see these potteries, these pots, or textiles, for instance. You guys, if you've traveled, there may be some here in Lebanon too. It's very easy to copy and sell off, pass off as being authentic when in fact they are not authentic. This is a serious problem for indigenous communities. They have people come in, copy their designs, sell their products, and that takes away this indigenous community source of income. And they often turn to other more nefarious activities such as growing illegal drugs, illegal substances, it deprives them of a legitimate source of income. And this happens all over the world. Now, one of the ways intellectual property rights can help solve this problem is through something called, we have trademarks generally, and there are things called collective marks and certification marks, and then we also talk about copyright. Now, in the example of some of these indigenous people, say in Peru, if you have a textile, that can be protected by copyright. Like, you have a copyright in that design. So that's one mechanism for protecting somebody from selling a good that is copying, your design. Now, as a practical matter, how are you going to do that? If you're one person, an indigenous person, you don't have the resources, you don't have the access to counsel, how are you going to protect your rights? Well, a good way to do that is to organize yourselves collectively. So we have these things called collective marks, certification marks, that allow people to group together and more effectively protect their intellectual property rights in that way. So you'll have a little sign, a little trademark that sources the product. So if you have a textile from a certain community in Peru, you can have a collective mark that if a product has that mark, it tells you that this product is definitely from this community. There's also something called certification marks, which mean if you get a certification mark, your good or product has met certain minimum standards. An example of this would be energy efficient goods. Like if you have a refrigerator that has a little, in the United States, an Energy Star, it means that it's met certain standards. This can be the same for creative industries, for cultural products as well. Okay, finally, there's so many creative and innovative people here in Lebanon. A big problem is, where do you turn? How do you receive help if you have a problem? If you are a creator, if somebody is infringing your intellectual property rights, or you're having trouble making a living from your creativity, what do you do? Where can you turn to? Well, there's lots of people who can help. Organizations like us can help. Organizations like the embassy can help. A lot of it is just about access to information, right? The more people learn about intellectual property rights, the more they understand that if there's a problem, perhaps there are solutions. So this is what we're trying to do today, is just raise some awareness, celebrate creativity here, and hear from local Lebanese about the importance of creativity and the arts here in the country. So I encourage you to visit us. We have a website and a Twitter account. Please check it out. We're going to be ramping up, producing a lot more content. You can find it online. Again, this is about painting a picture of Lebanese creativity and the contribution it has to economic growth and development here in Lebanon. So thank you very much. And with